Welcome to Module 3, the Accounts Receivable for Microsoft Dynamics SL 2015. So within this module, what we're going to go through are the 5 basic areas of Microsoft Dynamics SL's Accounts Receivable module. We're first going to go through the setup screens, maintenance screens, talk about those screens that gets data into the screen, the input screens, followed by the processing screens, and lastly, we'll end up with the inquiries and reporting processes. So the first screen that we're going to talk about is the Accounts Receivable Setup screen. Now, if you've learned through going through the other modules, we do have setup screens that allow us to set up the default values. So for example, the Accounts Receivable account and sub-account are the default values that will be used when you're doing data entry into the screens, but they are able to be changed. Now, I did want to point out that in our invoice accounts and payment accounts tabs, there are 3 sets of fields that do not get changed during data entry, and I did want to point them out real quickly. One is the fact that the discount account and the default finance account, those values are the values that will be used to do those items automatically and cannot be changed. As well with the payment accounts, under the payment accounts tab, we have the NSF field, which defaults to the value you set up in the accounts receivable screen. Besides that, the other fields that you see will be available to be edited if needed. Let's go ahead and jump into the Accounts Receivable Setup screen. So we talked about the first 2 tabs. Next thing we'll talk about is the GL options. Now the GL options allow us to first determine how the data flows. As we spoke of in the other modules, the idea from accounts payables or accounts receivables to your general ledger module will allow you to determine whether the data that's flowing from this module needs to be summarized, meaning if there are bunches of batches and a batch has the same information, should we summarize it, or should the information go to the general ledger in detail? That's based on your personal preference. The next section is, what is that period? We've talked about periods before, but what's the current period in accounts receivable? The idea, again, is that accounts receivable might be a period ahead than the general ledger because you've chosen to hold off on setting that or closing that period. Like we've had, the idea of retention is set up in the next several fields. How many years to retain history for accounts receivable? How many periods to retain all those detailed transactions that you have in accounts receivable? We also have the ability to set up the number of periods and the average days to pay. Now the idea, the number of periods it's going to look at, say, let's see how many days it took for us to pay, and let's look over the last 6 periods to get what that average is. So that's something that you can set up, whether it's 6 periods, 12 periods, whatever you need to set up there. The next section is the customer default section, and it's going to do pretty much what it says. When you're setting up a new customer, what are the default things that should be set up for that customer? Again, what we're doing here is hopefully making the process of setting up a new customer quicker and faster so you don't have to automatically go in here and change things and type in more information. The first one is around our default statement cycle, and we'll talk about that in a second when we get to our maintenance area, but think of that as the area of how often are we going to be running our process to see exactly what customers are going to be run together as far as how often do we have to receive things from them as far as our aging goes as well. The next is a customer class default. We'll talk about customer classes in a second, but the same idea as we had in other modules. This is a default class that can be set up to default information for you so you don't have to set it up. And it's also a nice way to report on certain types of customers. Let me see all of my retail customers. Let me see all of my government, my commercial. Now what we can do inside there is set up default information for them, such as the default accounts as we spoke of. So what's the default accounts they should use, and what are the terms potentially that are used when you're talking about the class of customer of retail. The next area, we have the ability to set some defaults onto exactly what are the type of statement of the default statement types that we want. Whether we want to have open items, so I just want to see the ones that are open, or I want to see the balance forward, which will be all the previous items, including the new ones that are open right now. Some items for other modules, like our order management module, allows you to decide whether this is a customer who is going to have back orders or not. We can also decide if we want to automatically apply payments. Now the idea here is that with the customer automatically apply payments process is that when I put a payment in the system, I'm not specifying exactly who it needs to go against. I don't need to say, I want to apply this against a specific item that's out there. just apply it to whatever the oldest and is fine. And if you turn that on, this button on, it will automatically apply it to whatever the oldest is. Or if you turn it off, then you have more flexibility on choosing exactly what you're applying that payment against. Other areas we can do is around our small balance write-off. So you can determine exactly whether you're going to allow small balance write-offs and what those values should be. You also have the ability that if you get a check that gets sent back to you, what should you be charging them? So you have an entry to put that value as whether you want to charge them and how much it's going to be. And you have the ability to turn on whether you want to age payments, prepayments, and credit memos along with the items that you're putting in that are allowed to be received. On the other side of the screen, we have their payment application sort defaults. Again, when we open up the screen, what should it look like when I'm going to apply payments and what should we sort them by, whether it's document type, reference number, or the due date. And then also when we look in the customer maintenance screen, this will make more sense, but when we open up the screen, what do we want to see? We want to see all documents, just the ones that are open, or the current plus open documents. The next tab here is our finance and charge setup. Again, if you are going to do finance charges for your customers, go ahead and set up what that percentage is, what's the minimum finance charge, and whether you're going to allow to at least charge the minimum to them. As well as you have the ability of compounding finance charges and deciding exactly how to apply to the finance charge first, whether you're going to say no, use the document date order, or no, you're going to choose yes and pay the finance charges first, or at the time of entry, are you going to be prompted so you can decide exactly what you want to do? The last tab is the other information. The information first at the top is going to be our batches. And batches, as we've talked about before, are used across the modules. So we have what is the batch number specific to accounts receivable and what was that last number. Turning on the idea of an auto reference number. Again, we want reference numbers to be able to assign and track things as they go through the process, and whether we want to turn that on or not. And if we have it turned on, what was that last reference number? And make sure as we go forward that we know what the next reference number will be. The next is in our transaction descriptions. Now, when these items come from somewhere, from another module, we'll have information about the inventory item, different bits of information. But when the information is just coming straight out of accounts receivable for this customer, what do we want to go into these description fields that we have, whether it's a customer ID, a customer name, or a combination of both, or if it's something we're going to allow the users to enter whatever they need to put into that area. The next section is on credit limit checking. So how will we be checking for credit? So when we're actually going in, when we go to put something in the system for this particular person, this particular customer, how do we want to check it? Well, we can do it based on a limit amount. We can do it on the days past due. We can just do a warning, or we can do a combination of our combined amount and our days together. So in this case, you can see I've set it to a very, very large amount. So when I go into the system, I'm not going to be warned. But of course, you would want to set this at a different area, whether it's an amount or a percentage. Other areas we can define information as what the information will display on the screen, decimal places that will be displayed, whether it's the price and how many decimal places after the zero, as well as our quantity. And that really depends on how you're setting things up in your system and how that works. The next is when we're going to the payment application screen, how many documents do you want to display on the screen? Let's go ahead and go back to our slides and kind of briefly, after we kind of rolled through the accounts receivable, talk about some of these important things. Again, the GL options, we're setting up how things need to flow and retainage. Next, we're setting up what are those default things for our customers? The cycles, the classes, what will be used when we're generally setting up a new customer. What we're using our statements for, again, open items that are all of our open items, or balance forward, which is only going to be those new items. Whether we are going to allow small balance write-offs, and how some of our aging information, aging payments, prepayments, and credit memos, along with some viewing options. Next, we talked about finance charges and where to set up those percentages and how they're getting applied and what that minimum amount could be. We then went to the last tab where we talked about that last batch number and ref number, which we've talked about in the past, as well as how things go to your transaction as far as the descriptions, credit limit, sales tax, and also documents and the number that you're going to view. So the next section we're going to go into is the maintenance screens. And this is where we set up information around the information accounts receivable. So we'll start off with the statement cycle. And the statement cycle allows us to do a couple different things. One, it allows us, we can each have a unique cycle ID. And then what you're going to assign to those cycle IDs is the aging days. Whether it's 30 days, 7 days, 15 days, you get to set up different agings as you would like. And then basically once you have them set up, you're going to go ahead and set up what those days are. In this case, we're saying it's 30, 60, 90 for this particular one. And you're also able to setting a dunning message assigned to it. So if we do print statements, which we'll talk about here in a second, when I print out my statements and they're past a certain value, what do I want to print on their statement? So they get the notification, you're 30 days overdue, 60 days overdue, and so forth. And the idea behind the statement cycle is that if I have a bunch of customers that are all on that same cycle, that we can assign them to one cycle, so I don't have to run and decide who's in and who's out, who are we running it for, or running it for a specific customer. We assign them all to one statement cycle, and it takes care of assigning those and running those for us. The next is our customer maintenance screen. Let's go ahead and jump into the customer maintenance screen. So if I go under accounts receivable, under maintenance, to the customer maintenance screen, we can go ahead and pull up a customer, and I'll just type them in. As we go across the top, we see information like the customer ID and the customer description. We've talked about the idea of IDs, class IDs. In this case, if I look up lists on that, we see that this particular customer is set up as a commercial customer. And as we've seen here, we can then use that to default in exactly what happens with this customer. Now, of course, these are the defaults that will populate the customer maintenance screen, but of course we have the ability to change them once they're here. Next area we have is the ability to set up your terms, which automatically defaulted, but as we've seen before, terms are things that are used either in a specific module or across modules. Pulling up that term and clicking on the edit button allows me to see that this particular term is something that can be used not only for customers or in vendors as well. We can see that the number of days and the percent discount as well as the number of days that are due. The next section is on credit, and this allows me to go ahead and decide exactly whether I want to do credit checking on this particular customer, along with those other different types of items. Some of these impact the accounts receivable module. Some of these, like never sell and so forth, impact other modules like our order management module. You can set your limits. It will go ahead and, based on our settings in the setup screen, calculate what our average days to pay, as well as allowing us to set up grace periods as well. On the right-hand side of the screen, we have our balance information that's going to show us our current balance, future, and other type of balance information around this customer, along with our last invoice and our last activity that's been happening with this particular customer. We also have information around the history behind this particular customer. This history screen is going to show me that we've been generally just doing sales with this particular customer here in this last period, but also can show me other information like debit memos, credit memos, any finance charges or discounts that have been entered against this particular customer. As well, we can see activity. Activity, very similar as we had over in the vendor maintenance screen to look at what things have been put into the system. Same idea here in the customer maintenance screen. So we can pull up and see for a specific company or all companies. We can see exactly which documents we'd like to see. We like to see all the open documents, current plus open, or open documents only. We can also go ahead and include applications. And what that's going to do is it's going to show us not only our invoice and our payments, but anytime that there was a payment out there, we'll be able to see if it was applied against a specific invoice. Along with being able to see the information out here, we can also go down to drill into the details of this particular item. So we can look at this invoice, click on the invoice transaction, and see the exact document that was entered into the system that we've gone ahead. And we'll look at the document maintenance here just in a second, as long as being able to see the payment that was associated there. The next button that we have up here is the shipping address button. This generally is used in the purchasing module. So for purchasing modules, in the order management module, pardon me, that allows me to go ahead and set up what the default shipping address, or if I have multiple shipping address used in order management, we can go ahead and set that up as well. The next tab is the address tab. Again, we have our main address as well as our bill to, and the ability to set up the address information once and use the copy to button to copy the main address over to the bill to information. The next tab is the default information. Again, we can decide on tax information around this particular customer. We can set up specific tax IDs or multiple. We can also set up if there's a specific currency associated. In this case, we only have one currency, which is base, but we could set that up as well. We also have all those accounts that defaulted in. So the GL accounts for receivables and sales and prepayments, they automatically defaulted in here. In this case, mostly because of our class ID, but we're able to change them as well. The next tab is the Other Information tab. And the Other Information tab allows us to define things. For example, do we do statements in our company? So if I want to be able to print statements to this company and say exactly that, yes, you've owe us, this is the past due amounts, we can go ahead and turn on this printing statements option. Again, as you talked about open, item, and balance forward on the setup screens, you can go ahead and decide exactly how you want to use it for this particular customer. Whether if we are doing statements, do we want to print dunning messages automatically on our statements? Whether we want to automatically apply finance charges. If they haven't paid us in that time frame, what are those? What do we want to automatically apply those finance charges? Next is our statement cycle. We showed you that you can have multiple ones. We had showed you that we had 3 of them set out there. We can go ahead and assign people to to any one of these particular statement cycles that you have out there. The idea here is when we get and talk about aging, it helps the aging process as well as the statement running process to go ahead and generate things that are for certain types of customers. We have the next one, which is the last statement date. So this is the last time the statement cycle was run. And we have the auto-apply payments. Now, the idea behind auto-apply payments is that I don't want to have to think about choosing what is this particular item paying for. If I don't want that, I can say, hey, just apply it to whatever the oldest item is out there. We can do that. We have some general information about credit cards available here and some information around sales. And with our sales information, we can specify here in the AR module who is the person associated to this particular customer. So when items come in, that this Phil Spencer person right here will get all the credit that he needs, and we'll be able to run reports to see exactly what he's been doing and what are the things, the commissions that he has owned. So we have the ability to go ahead and either very simply at a salesperson level or even at a sales territory level as well. Now, as I said, we also have the interaction between the accounts receivable module and our order management module, which allows us to do a lot of great things around ordering and setting up steps. And we have 2 tabs devoted to that information. We're going to skip over those and, again, recognize the fact that they're there to set up defaults for your accounting areas as well as how you want to interact with that. But you can learn more about that when you learn more about your order management functionality. And the last bit that I want to talk about is our quick send setup. And we'll talk about a little bit of this in our vendor maintenance screen when we were talking about payables. But again, the idea of a quick send is that we can automatically, in this case, take an AR invoice and we can automatically send it to the customer directly. Now, this cuts out the process of me having to print out my invoice, take it, maybe I put it in an envelope and snail mail it off to somebody, or maybe I put it into the fax machine and send it off. This process will automatically fax or email directly to my customers, getting that invoicing process starting quicker and hopefully help me out in that process. Now, another thing we talked about on the other side is the vendor has a similar process and the ability of taking a document and sharing it up to SharePoint. And that's the icons across the top. And we'll actually take a look at one of these on this side where we can take this invoice and if instead of printing it out and putting it in a filing cabinet, we can take this exact document, put it up to a SharePoint site. So if anybody wants to find it at a later time, it's not getting up from your desk and walking, trying to find the right filing cabinet. It's going to one site, in this case for this customer, to be able to go ahead, grab their information, view the items that are out there, and move forward. So there we have some information on our customer maintenance screen. And let's quickly review some of these items that we talked about. Important things, obviously, are our terms, Again, the ability to view the detail and history and activity behind this particular customer. The next we had the idea of a customer class. The idea here is instead of having to set up the AR accounts and prepay accounts all the time for every single customer, well, if we know they're going to be similar and they're going to have the same terms generally, we can set up a class for that. Next, we talked about the idea that we have addresses, our main address and then the address that we use on our invoices, which is our bill to, and how to set those up. The next is we have some information around taxes and accounts. So whether we want to set up multiple tax IDs for this customer, whether we want to go ahead and set up what the accounts are going to be. Again, those general ledger accounts and AR sales and prepayment accounts will default in for us, but then we have the ability to make adjustments. Under the other section, we talked in details a lot of these, but again, what are the formats, whether we're going to choose to print statements for these items, whether we want to automatically apply finance charges, what that default statement cycle is, and so forth. So we have that along with our salesperson information. Gives people a way to set up their customers the way that they need them. The next was our order management and order management GL account information. Again, not used with what we're going to be talking about today, but shows you some of the information that you can set up for the order management module. And lastly was our quick send and doc share, which will actually go ahead and enter some information in here so you can actually get a better look at exactly how these items work. Now with that, that was our setup screens or our maintenance screens. Now what we're going to do next is go into our input screens. Our input screens are going to be actually entering in that invoice and memo. So this is saying, Mr. Customer, this is what we need you to pay. Next, going in and saying, well, now we actually have the payment. So we have two screens here. We'll talk about the payment entry and payment application screen, how they differ and why you would use one over the other. With that, first, let's go ahead and look at the invoice and memo screen. So I will switch to the live screen here. So the first screen, you're going to know some things that are common. Some of the things you should be recognized is that, again, the idea of a batch. So a batch can have multiple documents in it, and within those documents we can have multiple transaction lines. So batch, document, transaction. So let's go ahead and look at that batch again. When I look at the batch area, I have an area for a batch number. It will automatically get assigned to me, so I generally don't need to go ahead and look it up. But if I need to look up and pull up a previous one, I can go look up and choose a specific batch that has already been loaded. The next is my period information. As we've talked about before, this is the period that this particular module, accounts receivable, has been set up to default. I can change that if needed. Then I'm telling it, okay, now I'm ready, I'm done with it. I want to release it now or release it later, or just leave it basically in the current status. The next is my control total. What is that total amount of all the documents and line items that I'm putting in? I can put my value into the control total. So again, the batch information, high-level information about the entire thing. Again, the idea of our batches is that you're going to have multiple documents to put into the system, and you want to go ahead and have some type of control total. I'm putting 15 items, 15 batches, or 15 documents in. The total for all those documents, I quickly calculated, is going to be 500, 1,000, whatever it happens to be. Put that value in there first, so then you can start entering your process and kind of tracking where you are in that process. The next section we'll look at is the document area. Different type of items you can put into the system. We're going to do an invoice today, but you have the ability to also do a credit memo, a debit memo, or a cash sales, if cash sales being that you're not using, potentially not using the order management module and you want to do a cash sale right now. With that, we've chosen that we want to do an invoice. We go ahead and choose our customer. I can look them up or type it in. After that, I go ahead and put what is the date, which I'll let to default to the current date set up in the system. And what is that total amount that we're going to put in? In this case, it's going to be $500. So then we've got our customer, we've got the information, we can put a description around it. We have our terms. So what are the terms? We talked about terms before being used and being set up, and I can choose other valid values that are in the system as well. After that, you can see other information that's defaulted in, including our salesperson ID that we had set up. So there's Phil. Again, I can change it if need to, but it's going to default in for me. It's defaulted some other information around the company I'm logged into so I can see exactly what I'm getting ready to put information into. It's going to go ahead and calculate what the discount date and the due date. Allow me to go ahead and set up what the due date's going to be. So, and then I also have some options for some overriding. Again, we talked about the fact that in customer ID, we've gone ahead and set up what the default account should be, but of course we have the ability to override them inside the Account Override tab. So again, we have our batch information. We've gone ahead and entered the information around our customer and around the total amount for this particular document that we're putting in. Now let's go ahead and put in their transaction lines. Now, as we come in, and we've talked about before, again, with the multi-company feature, this could be an entry that you're putting in for the current company or for another company, so you have that flexibility to choose a different company. It's defaulted to the accounts that we've set up for this particular customer, so it's, again, saving me some time. Now, the next thing I can do is, if I know that the total amount that I just want to charge them is $250, I can go ahead and just simply put in that value. Now, in other cases, you might say, well, Jeff, we actually want to charge them for some information, so we actually want to keep track of these items, and it's not just a total amount, but it's actually quantity and unit costs. So maybe they purchased 5 items, and the unit description is going to be each, and that we want to go ahead and put some cost in here. Let's say we want to do $50. And so what that's going to do is add the total 2 of those together and give me a total amount. So I see that there's 5 at 50 at 250, and we can see that the values together make up the 500 that we were looking for. Now, after I'm done that, and I could have done this earlier, I can go ahead and click on Save. And now I've got my 2 items in the system. Now, a common question comes into fact is, how is my invoice, if I go ahead and I print this out, what is it going to look like? And a lot of times people want to see that before they even release their batch. So one nice feature that we have is the invoice preview screen that will allow me to view it right from inside of the invoice and memo screen. So let's take a look at that. So I'm in here, everything looks hunky-dory. I click on the invoice preview screen, and it gives me a nice view of how things are out. And we can go ahead and choose to get a little closer here. But we can view the entire page, or I can go ahead and zoom in so I can see exactly what is this information going to look like. So I can scroll down and see, yep, that looks good. Now you might see here, we've got a unit cost, a quantity, and a value, and a price, and you might go, you know what? I like that, I don't like that, and the nice thing about it is we can see it before you release your batch. You can go back into the system and say, you know what? I do want to change this. I want to change both of these to have the quantities, the units, and so forth. So the nice thing about it is it does give you this ability to go ahead and preview it before you actually release the batch. Now, if you remember in our discussions, if I decide that I want to release the batch, telling it to release now, that I'm done with it, yep, I'm ready to process it, it's going to prompt me and ask me, well, are you trying to add another invoice to this batch, or are you done with the batch? I'm going to go simply here, say I'm done with the batch. It goes ahead and it'll process our batch for us. Now, as the batch is processed, I can do a couple of things here. I can pull that up again. And I look at my batch, and actually now we can talk about some additional features that we have in the invoice and memo screen around our quick send and our publish to SharePoint. Now, what quick send will allow me to do, and I'll just do as an example over here, it will allow me to either do a one-time send, or I can use this if I've already set it up in the system to automatically email or fax directly this invoice right to my customer, right from the screen. Now, the nice thing about that is I don't need to, as an end user, really worry about a lot of the information. It's something that's set up in the customer maintenance screen, so once it's set up once, we don't have to do it over and over again, and I can automatically click on a button like the quick send button and automatically send that off to my customer. Now, another feature is the ability to publish documents right to SharePoint. Now, what that means is that I've set up in the system that for this particular customer out there, the School of Fine Arts, I've created a SharePoint site for them. And what it is, it's a place that I can store documents. So I've got an area out here. I've got the name of the particular customer, the School of Fine Arts, and I've created a directory, or it's actually created for me, a directory called AR Invoices. So at any time, if I want to view them, I can store them here up on a SharePoint site without having to actually print them out and put them into a filing cabinet. I can actually go right to this screen, view the invoices that are sitting out there, and that I don't have to get up from my desk and go look at the information that's out there. So a great way to get to the information. Again, the idea here is that we're entering in invoices that we want our customers to pay. It gives us some great ways to save this information to share it with other people within the company. So the next thing is I've entered it in. Now, how do I've actually finally got the payment. Maybe I've sent up my printing statements. We'll talk about that later. We've asked for the payment. We've actually received it, so what do I do now? Well, there are two ways to do it. There's two screens. One's the payment entry screen, which the only thing you can do in that screen is enter a payment. And the second is the payment application screen, which allows you to enter a payment and also apply it to an invoice at the same time. So let's talk about it. Why would you want to have two different screens? Well, in a lot of companies, you want to segregate people's ability to do things. So, Jeff, sure, we're happy for you to enter payments, but we want someone else, and we want to segregate our duties. So Jeff can definitely enter as many as he wants, but we want someone else to be able to go in and actually apply them. So these screens allow you to do that, allow you to break them up into two areas. And what we're going to do is we'll look at the payment application screen, which does both, and then kind of talk about how that works in the payment entry as well. So with that, let's go ahead and jump live into the payment application screen. So if we go into accounts receivable, we're going to go to one of the process screens, and to the input screens, and we're going to go to the payment application screen. Now, with the payment application screen, we've got that idea of a batch. It's going to get assigned to me as we talked about. The period of post is automatically going to default for me. First thing I need to do is see if there's anything out there for this School of Fine Arts for us to pay. And as you kind of saw, we've entered some information into the system. So we're going ahead. It's for this specific customer. We can choose what we like to do, whether this is a payment, a credit memo, or a prepayment. So you can do any three of those and apply them. In our case, we're going to go ahead and do a payment. It's automatically going to go ahead and give us a reference number. Let's say we get a check here and it's for $500. Oops, I thought I entered that in. I apologize. The number field, which you need to put in here, this is your check number that you received. So I apologize. You need to put that into the system first. Obviously, it wants to, and obviously the usual method of using that field is to keep their check number so you can reference it when someone asks you, did you get my check? And here's my check number. So you have a way to kind of reference it as well. So once we have our payment, we have our check number and the amount of the check, then we can come down to the section below. Now in the payment information screen, the payment memo screen, you're going to see a lot of fields that defaulted here. Here's the accounts that's been set up for this particular customer. And we'll see currently that there is zero, none of this has been applied. So all 500 of it is waiting to be applied against all these open items that are below. Now how can I apply them? Well, we do offer you a couple ways to do it. There is an auto apply, which you can put in a dollar amount and hit the button. And all it's going to do is grab the oldest, if you look at here, reference number wise, it is the oldest reference number out there, and it's automatically going to apply it to that. If we go back here, we'll see, yep, we see that we had 500 up here, none of it's available for us to apply. So you can do it that way. I can also go down and blank that out and say, you know what? What I really want to do is put it against this one item right here. And this is where we talked about the fact that you can have it set up to automatically apply for a customer, and what that automatically apply would have taken the request away from me to actually choose where to apply it and would automatically apply it to the oldest. So here I can go ahead, and I've seen that I've chosen that I'm going to put it against this one. And we also have some sort order things which change basically how things display below. So we have the ability. So what's the idea behind the screen is, one, I can go ahead and record the fact that I did get this check and I got it from this particular customer, and then I can apply it. So now that I'm ready, I'm going to put my control total in that, yes, it's $500 that we're putting into the system. I can go ahead and choose to release it. Again, it's going to say, are you ready? Are you ready to do another payment application? Because a lot of times what you're going to want to do is put multiple payment applications in one batch. But in this case, we're doing it pretty straightforward and simple. We can go ahead and just do one. And now it's gone ahead and applied it. Now, if someone said, okay, I just want Jeff to be able to go ahead and do payment entry, you're going to see a very similar type of screen. I've still got that same idea that I want to go ahead and choose my customer. And, oh, I'm sorry, the check number that I got is 3456. And I want to go ahead and put it in for the School of Fine Arts. The total amount is $125. And I put that as my control total as well. So now I've got it sitting out there, and this is available for me to go ahead Now we can go ahead and save this. And this is the whole segregation of duties. Now Jeff is only able to go in and say that he's got to have a $125 check. He can release it. Click on Finish. And now we have a payment application that's out there. Now, how is that going to work differently? Well, that means that I can go ahead and crank in as many payments as I want, but it means if someone wants actually to apply them, one way you can do it is go into the customer maintenance screen, the payment application screen, choose that one, and there it is. There's that $125. So now I've got that $125 that someone else put into the system. I can go through and then apply it to the actual items that are still sitting out there. So kind of a quick idea of how you can use payment application and payment entry together. So that's our input screens. So the next item we're going to talk about is our process screens. So our process screens are used to process the information through the system or make some adjustments to areas. For example, what if you have a payment that you've received $99 out of 100? Well, what if you want to kind of close that out? Well, one of the things we're going to talk about here is our small balance and credit write-off area. We're going to talk about auto payment application. I showed you the fact that you could have people automatically putting just the payments in. This gives us the ability to do that as well. Next, we'll talk a little bit about applying finance charges, aging the customer detail, closing statement cycles, and then some of the common screens that we talked about around the accounts receivable module. So with that, let's start off with our small balance write-off. With the small balance write-off screen, this allows me to go in and choose whether I'm doing a small balance or a small credit. I'll choose the value. Let's say I'm looking for anything that's under $20. And then it allows me to go ahead and find anything that's out there. So again, the top area, we're telling it what it is. It's going to default in my period to date and the account information that I've set up for small write-off balances, asking me for a dollar amount, and then allowing me to find. Now, if I already knew this is an option selection criteria area, I could have said, I know it's just for this company, or I know it's just this customer. I could have optionally filled that information in. Click the Find button, and it has found one for me. So I'm able to go in and say, yep, this guy right here, I'm okay with writing him off. We only have $1.80 left. Completely fine. I could hit begin processing and would go ahead and do that. Now I could also, if I didn't like the fact that the account and sub-account it was going on against, I'd actually like to break that out. I could use the multiple account distribution button, which allowed me to put in multiple line items and say, yep, I want to put this amount for $1 and this, I could put it 80 cents against the second line. So you have that ability to break it out if you really need that functionality. And then the last step is just to go ahead and release this batch. So we'll go ahead and do a small write-off balance for this particular item that's sitting out there. So now that item will no longer be open for us to be expecting to receive payment against it. The next is the auto payment application screen. Now, what this is going to do is if you had someone go into that payment entry screen and start putting in a lot of different payments into the screen, and you really weren't worried about choosing exactly what they went against, you could use this screen to do that. You could just use the screen to open it up. It's going to show you, and it's going to allow you to choose by the different cycles that you currently have out there, and it's what you want to do with it. You can say, yep, go out there, find those payment entries, apply them against the oldest, have at it. I'm not really worried about which one it went against. And a lot of times if you're segregating duties and you want someone just to do payment entries, this is a screen that you might use. You also can choose whether you want to release batches when they're finished, so it automatically applies them and releases them so you don't have to view them, or you can leave them open so you can view them and maybe make some adjustments if needed. The next is if you want to apply finance charges. So applying finance charges is that if you are overdue invoices and you want to start applying those finance charges. We saw on the setup screen some things you can set up as well as in the customer area. So once you have that information set up, if you decide that, yep, these guys are over and we want to go ahead, you can choose one of those statement cycles to choose exactly who you're going to go ahead and apply finance against. Now remember in the setup screen we talked about what's the minimum amount, what's the percent, the amount, and so forth, so you have that flexibility. And then you can go ahead and decide based on this specific date, what finance charges do you want to apply. The next is the aging process. Now when you have these items into the system, you want to be able to age them to see exactly what customers owe you. Are they still in the current? Are they in the 30 to 60 days or 60 days or 90 days or older? So you want to be able to run this process. Now, this process is important because you do need to run this process to actually update what we call the buckets or the aging buckets that are displayed within the customer maintenance screens that we've seen in other areas. So you want to make sure that you run this process. It's going to go ahead and make sure that those buckets get updated with the latest and greatest information. So in this case, you can see after running the aging process, we can see that there's some things that are showing up in the 61 to 90 days. Looks like we're a little not current right now, so we're heading towards the over 90 days period. So this is a way to be able to view that information. And this is the process that runs to actually update that information. We also have the closed statement cycle. What the closed statement cycle allows us to do is when we're doing printing statement cycles, we want to be able to decide exactly who are the customers that we need to put statements out to. Now, you might decide not to, but one of the options, as we saw in our setup screen, is to say that, yes, I do want to print statements out. So it goes out and says, you know, you're over 30, you're over 60, you're about to fall into certain areas. Whatever dunning message you set up, you can have set up and have actually print out statements. And we'll take a look at what a statement looks here in a second. So when you're doing that, you want to be able to then close those statements. So what it's going to be able to do is makes that when you run this process, it's going to take any AR document and mark them, and then mark them that they're available, that we want to run a statement, that we want to run the statement. So you need to go ahead and close previous cycle and close the cycle so that we can go ahead and run our statements. Now, some options are here. You can also, at the same time that you're doing your closing statement cycles, you can also age your AR if that's the process that you're also going to run as well. So you can turn that on as well as including future period documents that are out there. Other items that are included that we've talked about in previous screens, or in previous modules, excuse me, we also have the ability that I could be in the process of Jeff's in charge of entering into the voucher screen, but he's not actually able to go ahead and release the batches. So we have a same screen as we saw before. We can release the batches. If we decide that we have recurring AR batches, recurring invoices that are happening every month, and we want to do that, we also have that same ability inside of accounts receivable. Again, for more details on that, you can look at your payables or general ledger area to see that. But again, we can set up that recurring, set it up, and then generate them as we need them. And last, we also have our delete AR detail, which again, we can decide based on our setup screen. So in the accounts receivable setup screen, we can say what needs to be deleted, what needs to be kept, and run this process to determine exactly what we want to keep inside our database or not. The last section that we want to talk about, this is our invoice and reporting section. We're going to go through some of the screens that you can use to inquire on information that you have out there. We'll also jump into looking some of the reports that are available to you, including our statements, and then be able to jump back into a quick query feature that allows us to view the information and drill back into the details. So the first thing I want to look at is the AR invoice preview, and we're going to go ahead and jump and look at this live. Now, when I was showing you the invoice and memo screen, one of the things I showed you was the fact that you can be inside the invoice memo screen and say, before you even release that item, you can actually get a preview and say, hey, how's this invoice going to look? So what I can do is there's also a nice little screen under inquiries called the AR invoice preview screen. Now, one of the things you probably noticed is that I had to go in one by one and view them. The nice thing about this screen is it allows me to go through and look at multiple items at one time to see exactly what's going on with these items. Stretch this out here so we can see a little bit more. So I can see the total amounts, the prices, everything that we talked about before on the other screen. But now I can do it, I don't have to open up the screen and load different things. I can do them all at one time. And the good thing about it is if I look at this line item and say, you know what, I'm missing the each on these line items, all I need to do is right click on the line item, click invoice and memo, and it'll go ahead and drop me back into the invoice and memo screen that was originally entered in. And because it's still open, I'm free to go in and start making edits to it. So I have that ability to go in and make edits to these items and move forward with the process. So the quick query viewer / the AR invoice preview screen allows me to do that. The next one is the application inquiry and reversal screen. What it'll allow us to do is unlink payments, move payments, void payments, and it allows us to process these all here in the current period. So let's go ahead and take a look at that screen. So what we can do is go ahead and choose our customer. We can then go and look at any things that are that have currently been entered in here. So I can look at this payment that's out there. I see the payment, and I can decide what I want to do with this item. So for example, as we said, we can go ahead and void it. We can go ahead and reclassify it to a different customer because maybe I applied it to the wrong place, my bad. Or we can reverse the application if it's not going through. We can go ahead and reverse it as well. So you have the ability to view those items and void them as well. So that is, again, once I have this information in there, I can go ahead and decide what I want to avoid, decide whether I want to reclassify it, and then hit the Begin Processing button, and it'll go through and do that application reversal or allow it to get applied to a different area. The next is the Customer Inquiry and History screens. The Customer Inquiry History screens, very similar. These are the same screens that we had available to us on our customer maintenance screen. So same idea, but again, you can access them right from the menu as well. Again, being able to see information about the customer, being able to see exactly what's sitting out there, things that are the aging area, so you can see exactly what things are current, what things have fallen into 1 to 30 days, and so forth. We can also see information about their balances and drill down to the details, and we'll take a look at that here in a second. We also have our customer history screen that gives us a view of what's been happening with inside of this customer for the sales side. We can see debits and credit memos put against them as well. So it gives us a nice high-level view. Let's go ahead and look at the customer inquiry screen and show you how you can drill back. And we'll pull up our School of Fine Arts that we've been working with. And again, we can go ahead and drill back to look at our current activity and see the information around them. We can then drill into the invoice details and get back to the original documents that were entered into the system. Same idea, if we were using our order management module, allows us to view our orders, things that have not shipped and so forth. So any of these items with these little magnifying glasses on them allow us to go backwards and drill into the details that you have out there. Next, as far as reports, we do have a large section of reports that I have here. Some of them, again, maintenance screens to show you what you set up in the screen. Other reports are our statement reports. So here's a nice example of that statement. So for example, if we went ahead and set up for the School of Fine Arts at one time, these were items that they needed to go ahead and pay. We can show them the items that are still out there outstanding for invoice and what's actually been applied, what payments have you sent us, and be able to reference that information. So we can do that. This allows us to provide them with the statements they need to hopefully they can make the right choices and go ahead and pay us for future invoices that are, invoices that are currently in the system. Just like we had over in the accounts payable side, we also have reports that either run for the current period or for prior periods as well. So we have our customer trial balance and aged AR reports, which will run for the current period, but we also have period-sensitive customer trial balances and period-sensitive aged AR, which will allow us to show it for different run for prior periods as well. So here with our period-sensitive aged AR, you can see the information around this particular customer and items that are out there. We'll go ahead and open this up here. So let's go ahead and jump into our period-sensitive aged AR. Reports for accounts receivable, as we've located under the report section. If we pull up our period-sensitive aged AR, again, as we talked about, we have the ability to choose different formats. Whether this case, since it is looking for previous periods, it's going to show us historical information. We can go ahead and specify an aging date, a period to run. Hit the preview button, and it'll go ahead and show us for the current period as of 12/99. Again, on the right-hand side, we can choose to see exactly which cycles are out there. So we could drill into potentially the third cycle and drill down to see the person who's in that cycle to quickly get to the information. But we're going to see information like we had an invoice, we had an entry. Here's what this is where the terms are for this particular entry. Here's the average, here's the total amount, the average days to pay, which are obviously rather high in this test database. But we can kind of see also when things are entered in and they're paid as well. For example, for the School of Fine Arts, we can see all those transactions to show exactly what is our current balance and how did this happen? So here we see all the items that have been entered, what's been paid, and where we currently stand. The next section we'll talk about is our Quick Query feature. And Quick Query allows you to view things like customer balances or customer histories. And the nice thing about a Quick Query is it kind of takes the next step of kind of running a report and makes it a little bit more interactive for you to be able to get to the information that you need. So with accounts receivable, we're able to go and look at the accounts receivable reports like the customer balances. So what it will do is show me the customers that are out there. We can see the current balances. We're able to do and specify that, hey, I just want to see things that are for our for C300, so I don't want to see all the other ones that are out there. We're able to go ahead and run it for all of them that are out there. As we spoke of before, we have the ability to go ahead and add filters. So I want to see for a specific customer, for a specific company, we can see all the different balance and information out there. Look at the current aging balance that we have out against this particular customer. Other examples of a nice a quick query that you can run as well. You can also look at the AR invoice and debit and credits that we have out there. We can go ahead and view again by specific batch. We can go ahead and add a filter that I just want to see things that are for a specific customer ID. So I'll just look at the ones that are out there for C300. It shows me all the items that are out there. As we spoke of earlier, this information can be moved around to make more sense for you, so I can go ahead and change things around. If there are fields that are not there, I can go ahead and use the Choose Column feature to add fields back that I actually want to view on this report. Once I get to the information, I might find exactly what I want. I can go ahead and drill back into the initial document, so I can hit Document Maintenance and go back to the original item that's out there. And let me go back to make sure I'm in the right company. So let's grab that 500 and do that one more time. Okay, so what that's going to allow me to do is it allows me to drill back in to see exactly the document that I'm looking at here in this particular quick query. Another area is once I get the data here, what do we want to do? We usually like to throw this out into Excel, so you do have that functionality as well, which will be able to take this information, throw it out, and I just want the filtered rows to be put out into Excel. This way I can now go ahead and start looking at the information, sorting and selecting on it based on certain values, certain information that's out there, and be able to potentially provide information to other people within inside of my company. So with that, we've got the Quick Query feature that allows us, again, to find that information, sort it, select it, and put it back out. So that's Module 3, Accounts Receivable. Now let's talk about what we've learned in the Accounts Receivable module. First, we talked about the Accounts Receivable setup screen and all the different options. Next, we went into the customer maintenance screen and learned about all the settings in the customer maintenance screens and how they can, how they influence you when you're doing data entry. We then went and entered in an invoice. We entered in our invoice, put it into the system. Then we talked about how do we enter payments and how do we apply payments. We talked about two different screens that allow us to go ahead and do that. Next, we talked about aging things and printing statements. We were able to go ahead and run our aging process to fill those aging buckets, whether it's over 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and to update and keep those updated. We also talked about running statements to be able to send these information out to our customers so they know exactly what's going on. And then last, we went and we looked at some of the inquiries, this reports, as well as our quick query screen of how you can interact with the data in Accounts Receivable. So that's Accounts Receivable, Module 3. Thanks, and we'll be back to talk to you more in our next session.